So Miss Emily really goes into seclusion following that event where Homer Baron is not seen ever again. And we kind of can, you know, we might make those connections at this point, but it becomes much clearer at the end of the story once Miss Emily has died. But before she dies, there is a brief period where she comes out of seclusion. So at the top of page 161, so it describes the next time they saw her. So they saw her when she was buying the arsenic, and she was around the age of 30. The next time they see her, Miss Emily had grown fat and her hair was turning gray. During the next few years, it grew grayer and grayer until it attained an even salt or pepper and salt iron gray when it ceased turning. Up to the day of her death at 74, it was still that vigorous iron gray, like the hair of an active man. Her hair will become, kind of a symbolic feature of the passing of time, and her strength too, her kind of power, is that she sort of, is refusing to give up. Uh, and then from that time on, her front door remained closed, save for a period of 6 or 7 years when she was about 40, during which she gave lessons in china painting. She fitted up a studio in one of her downstairs rooms where the daughters and granddaughters of Colonel Sartoris' contemporaries were sent to her with the same regularity and in the same spirit that they were sent on Sundays, with a 25-cent piece for the collection plate. Meanwhile, her taxes had been remitted. So when she was 40 years old, she opened her house for a brief time to allow the grandchildren of, men of her father's generation so the children, the grandchildren of that generation, to come and take some china painting classes from her. So she is kind of artistic. She was the one who maybe drew that picture of her father and herself, the tableau, and china painting is her other kind of artistic pursuit. But it's kind of an old-fashioned thing to paint china. So she's also, represents that kind of old-fashionedness of society. And that old generation, the older generation, insisted that their children, their grandchildren, go to these china classes, right? So, and then the taxes remitted. We didn't really talk about that, but after her father had died, Colonel Sartoris, who was kind of this old-fashioned man himself, remits the taxes. So on the very first page of the story 155, oh, sorry, we have different texts, so the page numbers, ignore the page numbers, but at the very first part of the story, it's revealed that Colonel Sartoris had remitted her taxes from her father's death onto perpetuity. So for the rest of her life, she would not have to pay taxes under Colonel Sartoris, because her father had left her with no money and she was a pauper, so he felt sorry for her. So Colonel Sartoris gave her, he remitted her taxes at that point on. But it's not until later the newer generation of aldermen come into power and are now, the men who are leading Jefferson County, that they begin to, see that she's not paying any taxes at all. So they come calling to her house. And that is where we get them visiting to her house, knocking on her door, and then calling on her to address this tax issue. And when they get to the door, they see that, she's now a very small, fat woman in black, with a thin gold chain descending to her waist and vanishing into her belt, leaning on an ebony cane with a tarnished gold head. So she's now a very old woman at this point in time, once the younger generation of aldermen come and talk to her about the taxes. And what she says to them, she's trying to sort of chase them away. She says, "I have no taxes in Jefferson. Colonel Sartoris explained it to me. Perhaps one of you can gain access to the city records and satisfy yourselves." And then She says, "See, Colonel Sartoris, I have no taxes in Jefferson." But it's apparent to the rest of the aldermen that Colonel Sartoris is, he's no longer alive. He'd been dead for almost 10 years, and, she's not really even aware of that passage of time. For her, her taxes will always be remitted because Colonel Sartoris will always be the authority in Jefferson, and this modern group of men have no say, or no, she's not going to listen to them because they don't represent her views or the people that she respects. So she's very stubborn in her ways, and she's not going to go along with this passage of time. So she's very stubborn in this regard. And so she sort of kicks them out of her house, and until the day she dies, she's not paid taxes since her father's death. So she's very hard in her ways, very sort of stubborn in that way, unrelinquishing, and eventually she will die. And it's at that point that we learn the truth about everything that maybe the townspeople had figured out, but no one had ever said anything, or they just know and have never sort of talked about it. But they discover that upon her death, that um, they go into her house that's been sort of locked up for years and years, and bust into the upstairs of her house, into a bedroom that they realized or had known that it was there. So our last page of the story. So after she had died, the townspeople come to her house, and then they knock through the sealed up part of the upstairs. So this is at the end of the final sort of section. The Negro met the first of the ladies at the front door and let them in with their hushed, sibilant voices and their quick, curious glances, and then he disappeared. He walked right through the house and out the back and was not seen again. So her very sort of faithful kind of servant, or whatever you want to call it, he disappears. He's never said anything to anybody about what goes on in the house, about Miss Emily, and it's until her death. He just disappears after that, and nobody knows anything. He's never said a word about what's gone on. And then Miss Emily, so the ladies, the townsfolk come and bust through her house. And then it's already we knew there was one room in that region above stairs which no one had seen in 40 years, and which would have to be forced. They waited until Miss Emily was decently in the ground before they opened it. The violence of breaking down the door seemed to fill this room with pervading dust. A thin, acrid pall, as of the tomb, seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal. Upon the valance curtains of faded rose color, upon the rose-shaded lights, upon the dressing table, upon the delicate array of crystal and the man's toilet things backed with tarnished silver so tarnished that the monogram was obscured. Among them lay a collar and tie as if they had just been removed, which, lifted, left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. Upon a chair hung the suit, carefully folded, beneath it the two mute shoes and the discarded socks. The man himself lay in the bed. For a long while we just stood there, looking down at the profound and fleshless grin. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay. And upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of that patient and biding dust. Then we noticed in that second pillow was the indentation of the head. One of us lifted something from it and leaned forward, the faint and invisible dust dry and acrid in the nostrils. We saw a long strand of iron gray hair. So, pretty creepy ending. What that is sort of implying is that, they find Homer Barron's decayed corpse at this point, probably nothing more than a skeleton. Excuse me. So they find Homer Barron's corpse in Miss Emily's upstairs room. And the way the room is decorated implies that this was kind of going to be their bridal suite. So this is maybe the room that she had decorated, their master bedroom, where what it would have been their master bedroom, all, beautifully decorated at one point in this rose-colored material. And over top of this, beautiful material is this layer of dust. So dust will become one of the sort of central symbols in the story. And dust just covers everything, right? So if you think about how dust gathers, it's if things are unmoved or unchanged for a long period of time, that's when dust collects on something. So it becomes a kind of symbol of how Miss Emily is stuck in time, unchanging, unmoving, stubborn. Um, and this dust is, kind of a manifestation of that life, that she's not willing to sort of change or move or progress in any way. And her mindset is kind of stuck in the past. So the dust collects over everything related to Homer Barron and their one-time uh, prospects of falling in love and getting married. Everything appears as if it's a tomb. So it was meant for a bridal suite or a master suite full of, for newlyweds who are in love, becomes this kind of tomb atmosphere where this dead body lays. And everything is unchanged from that moment that Homer Barron had spent his last moments alive in there. So he, had the man's, nightshirt on and had taken his socks off, and all that stuff was exactly how it was left, unmoved. And then it's apparent the body had once lain in the attitude of an embrace. So at one point they would have been, embraced with one another in bed. So she would have been lying with this corpse, I guess, possibly, after he's been dead. So the fact that there was a long iron gray hair in the bed suggests that this was not the moment he died that she laid and embraced him. It maybe was a long time after, because she did have short hair. And when she was in public, she had, her hair had gone gray after much time, right? So this was an iron gray hair. So it suggests that she had laid with him, maybe more recently than that night. So maybe multiple times over the past couple of decades even, she would maybe go upstairs into this hidden room and lie with Homer Barron, the corpse, in a kind of, sick form of, marriage or whatever she had in her mind. She was unwilling to let him go, so she had poisoned him and kept him, basically. Cuckolded him is the way, or the word they used. Cuckolded meaning, it's sort of a word used to describe a woman who either has an affair outside of marriage and cuckolds her husband, so tricks him or outsmarts him or degrades his manhood by cheating on him. But in this sense, she's cuckolding, or he's cuckolded by death, and Emily as well sort of has cuckolded him in that she's sort of taken control, taken away his life, and made him her husband, even if he didn't want to be, in death. So it's a very twisted, perverse horror story about this woman's sort of psychological decline. And she becomes both a sort of victim and a perpetrator. So she's obviously a murderer, a perpetrator of crime, killing Homer Barron, but I think the story is also meant for us to sort of feel some feelings of pity or sadness for Miss Emily because she is kind of a victim of her circumstances. So she's been judged and criticized and gossiped about, and um, you know, her whole life has been that way. And she's been restricted by her father and judged by society. So here she is. She was given one chance at happiness, Homer Baron. She sort of sees him as her last chance for marriage, and she refuses to give that up. So she poisons him in order to keep him with her for eternity. Um, so it's a sad, horrifying, uh, weird, twisted story. Not what you would expect necessarily when you started reading, but it's an interesting kind of twist on a kind of southern horror gothic genre. Um, so playing around with some gothic imagery or ideas, where you have a kind of old decrepit mansion and a twisted protagonist or somebody with disturbing past or secrets. The secret room is kind of a gothic convention. The moody, weird atmosphere of the house, how it's kind of mysterious and starting to sort of fall apart over time. So all these are kind of conventional aspects of Gothic literature, and Faulkner's kind of playing with that genre, but putting his twist on sort of a southern setting. If we look at some other key elements, first let's just go over the chronology one last time so we get. So if you look at the chronology of the story in this slide, you can sort of see it mapped out in a different way. So this was how the events would play out chronologically or across time, linear timeline. It's not the way that the story is narrated, so it doesn't follow the structure of the actual story. But this is how the events would play out. So Miss Emily would have been sort of born around 1861. She would have died, or her father would have died when she was sort of in her early 20s, I guess. And then, okay, so she would have been in her 30s. Sorry, my math's bad. When her father dies. And then Homer Baron comes into town the summer following that. And then he's last seen entering her house. The neighbors, the townspeople come and sprinkle lime around her house. Then she stays in her house for 6 months, doesn't reemerge. And when she does, she's gained weight and her hair is starting to turn gray. After that, she sort of closes her house down, becomes more and more secluded, reemerges when she's in her 40s to give china painting lessons to the grandchildren of an older generation of townspeople. And then she doesn't have any contact with the town until the newer generation of aldermen come and ask about her taxes. At this time, she's walking with a cane, much older. And then eventually she'll die at the age of 74, where it's discovered that she has this secret room, this bridal chamber slash tomb that's been in her house for the past 40 years, and no one has ever seen this room. But it's kind of implied that maybe they knew about the room, but no one said anything, or they knew that something had happened to Homer Baron, but they just respected Miss Emily and never questioned her. They just sort of always saw her as this strange part, this monument of their town of times gone by. So some other symbols that are in the story that maybe reiterate the theme or idea of Emily being stuck in time, or as representing a time gone by. The house that she lives in is the obvious main symbol. And it's where, there's upstairs room that's locked away. It's almost like a mirror of her own self, and represents her own sort of fall from grace, or fall from propriety, or from status to being a pauper. The first paragraph of the story describes her house. So it says, when Miss Emily died, our whole town went to the funeral. The men through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument. The women, mostly out of curiosities to see the inside of her house, which no one save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook had seen in the last 10 years. It was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolling balconies in the heavily lightsome style of the 70s, set on what would have been our most select street. But garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. So in that description, the house kind of takes on almost a kind of symbolic quality that also represents Emily, her own fall from grace. And the house itself is described as stubborn and coquettish decay. So that could also kind of apply to Emily herself. She's very stubborn. The coquettish part could refer to her, coquettes are kind of it's a feminized term referring to kind of a flirtatious woman, or a coquette, somebody who's shy and flirtatious. And the house itself has once been beautiful, once very, the best house on the best street in all of Jefferson. But now it's become an eyesore, and it's decayed, and it's no longer up to the standard that it once was. So it does become a kind of mirror or reflection of Emily's own sort of fall from status. The other symbols that also relate to the passage of time, you could take a look at some of the other concrete items that either Miss Emily owns or uses over the course of the story as being sort of significant symbols. So the pocket watch that she's wearing when the younger generation comes to visit her and come knocking at the door. She's wearing a pocket watch at the time that's kind of tucked down under her belt, and it's on the end of a gold chain, ticking the whole time. So it's ticking away, ticking away. So it could represent the kind of the passing of time, and her being sort of stuck in time. And you also have her writing on stationery. So that's like a brief little description when she would write to the mayor, the alderman, and she writes on a very archaic, almost like in calligraphy and faded ink on this old-fashioned kind of paper, very old-fashioned. So she kind of represents a time gone by. Nobody writes in calligraphy anymore, and nobody writes on this, thin, almost like parchment paper. It's an old-fashioned kind of relic of a time gone by. And then the gray hair, obviously that's a symbol of time passing. So we see her going from having dark hair, cutting her hair, and then having gray hair, and then long gray hair at the time of her death. So that's sort of her going through these different periods, the passing of time. Her body changes too. She's very slender as a young girl, and then gains weight, as a lot of us might when we get older. The taxes as well represent, her failure to see time pass, and she's not progressing, but the rest of society is. So that's why they sort of come ask her about the tax situation. But to her, time never changes. It remains static or stuck. And the dust, of course, the dust that is very pervasive in throughout any scene with Emily. There's always a kind of a mention of dust in her house. And even when they visit her during that scene, that opening scene when they visit about the taxes, there's the smell of dust and disuse, a close, dank smell. A faint dust rose sluggishly about their thighs. So there's imagery of dust in description of her house. And when they open that bridal chamber, there's also dust all over the rose-colored material, the curtains and everything. So dust is also another symbol that you can think of when you're looking at the theme or idea of the passage of time. And the final symbol, which is another kind of mystery of this story, is where is Emily's rose? So the title of the story is kind of an enigma in itself, a rose for Emily. And there's no actual rose in the story, right? So there's no flower that is used or given to Emily at any point. So we kind of, as readers, have to figure out, what are the author's intentions in putting that title on this story about this woman? Where does the rose come in? So if you think about roses as symbols, usually we would give a rose to somebody in certain circumstances. Red roses are often given, if to somebody you love. You might give somebody a red rose or a bouquet of roses on their birthday or on their wedding day or um, on Valentine's Day. Usually red connotes, love relationships, right? You wouldn't necessarily give a red rose to your mother or your father or, somebody you had a platonic relationship with. Red roses are a symbol of love. Um, Sometimes you would give roses or flower to somebody on maybe an important occasion. You also put flowers on somebody's gravestone, so that could be another connotation of the rose imagery. Um, but there's certain life circumstances where you would gift somebody or give them a rose. And it's usually like an important moment in their life, usually a happy moment, but on some occasions, like on a funeral, you might also have roses, a bouquet of roses. And in the story, there's no flower specifically, so we have to kind of figure out what is a rose for Emily. Is there another person or something in her life that is like a rose or takes that same symbolic position of a gift given to her? So you can kind of piece it out on your own, but some critics have sort of thought of the rose as being Homer barren. So this is the one gift she's been given, I guess, or the love of her life. Like a rose is a symbol of love. He becomes kind of her rose that she tries to hold on to. And the imagery of kind of, you know, we want to keep flowers forever, but they're always going to fade and die, could be part of that as well. As Homer Barron will fade and die, uh, that love they had is not meant to last. So it could relate to that. It could also be the word rose is used quite often in regards to the dust everywhere. And the rose color is described as all over it's the color of the wedding chamber that she prepared for herself and Homer Barron. So it would be this pink colored, rose colored fabric all covered with dust. So it could be a representation of her own maybe hopes, dreams, wishes for a love, and then all that kind of decaying over time or covered with this dust. Rose is often a sort of female color or feminine color as well, pink rose, covered with dust. It could be sort of the decay of her femininity, could also be implied with that image of a wilted flower. And William Faulkner has also mentioned that his connotation for a rose for Emily is that, maybe the story itself becomes a kind of rose given to Emily or that type of woman of a different era that she represents. So he's kind of giving her this story as kind of a gift or tribute, the same way that you might give a bouquet of flowers to somebody to honor them or pay tribute to them. So he's sort of using the story to pay tribute to this type of woman that no longer exists, right? She's just of another generation, and that generation has passed on. So the story itself becomes a kind of tribute to a woman of another generation that no longer exists because she is, has gone, sort of, has been in decline, and that generation has died off. So those are the connotations for the symbolism in A Rose for Emily. So something to think about. So we talked about setting uh, in Jefferson County, the old mansion, the Old South. We talked about symbolism. We talked about character. We talked about chronology of the story structure. So there's a lot of depth and complexity to the story, and the twist in it is very sort of dramatic. So it's something to think about, all those aspects in the story.